My name is Donnya Piggott, and I'm an LGBT activist. I, like the gentleman said, I started the Barbados Gays, Lesbians, and All-sexuals Against Discrimination. And when I think about discrimination and homophobia in Barbados, I know that there are these major factors that really, you know, fuel discrimination and homophobia in our island and the world generally. Now, these factors are religion, that say that homosexuality is just wrong. And then there is gender roles, which are behaviors and expectations of men and women and how they're supposed to behave, right? And then we have ignorance. I was supposed to do this. This was supposed to go
It's
first.
like boom, bye, bye, in a batty boy head.
So I wanted to explain how this music here, how the music in the Caribbean also, affects how we behave. So we see here Buju Banton. Buju Banton was singing, the Batty Boy, and then he also was singing, he would also sing, I Want to Be Loved. So they're two completely different types of music and types of messages. But going back to what I was saying, these factors, ignorance, along with religion and along with gender roles, help fuel homophobia in Barbados and in the Caribbean and in the world, really. But I want to add another point to that. And that point is homophobia as a form of resistance. And how this came about is that it came about, I had a really, really bad experience in what I would deem the most Afrocentric space in Barbados. And I was in Temple Yard. Now, for those who don't know where Temple Yard is or what it is, Temple Yard is perhaps the most Afrocentric place in Barbados, or Afro-conscious, and it's frequented by the Rastafari community. Now, Rastafarians are generally very friendly and very loving people, but I had a horrible experience there. So I went, and this guy, he accosted me, and he said that he insulted me. He said some of the worst things to me for like 15 minutes. He said that he wanted to kill me. He said that he was going to stab me, and if he couldn't, he would put a hit on my head, and the most horrible things he said to me. And, I was scared, and that was obviously the last time I went to Temple Yard. And throughout it, when I thought about what he said, I was home for a while, and I didn't leave home. I was scared. I was really, really shaken up. I mean, just how aggressive he was. And I thought about it, and it wasn't so much about religion. It wasn't so much about, it was about my gender and sexuality, but it was so much about cultural imposition and the fact that I represented this cultural imposition, and I represented Western influence, and I was a product of Western influence, and it was about my identity as a Black person, and that I was, just embodying Western influence. So, and that's when I came up with, this idea of homophobia as a form of resistance. And what it really is, it's we as sovereign and independent states, post-colonial states, we so badly want to posit and to posture ourselves as independent states that we resist everything that is Western. So we want nothing to do with it. We're independent now. You can't tell us what to do anymore. And because of that, homosexuality is a part of that. So we see homosexuality as a Western influence, and we want nothing to do with it. And when I think about it, I go back to West Africa, where the majority of Barbadians would have come from, Black Barbadians at least, in post-colonial society. And we have Robert Mugabe. We have Robert Mugabe, and Robert Mugabe, as you can see, as most people know, Robert Mugabe is known and he's notorious for expelling white elite landowners from Zimbabwe. So he's anti-colonialism, he is anti-Western influences. That's Robert Mugabe, and not surprisingly, he's also anti-gay. So we know that Robert Mugabe is he resists what he calls Western influence, and he's anti-gay, and he's notorious for saying some horrible stuff about gay people. But it's not, I mean, while I use this West African experience and this West African example, we're not so far from it at home. So we have our politicians who are now so passionate about resisting these Western influences that they completely ignore the voices of our LGBT people on the ground and in our communities. So our politicians are talking about, are talking about gay marriage and gay adoption when on the ground we are dealing with discrimination. We're dealing with psychological, physical, and verbal abuse, and these old gay laws. And we so badly want to resist it that we do it at the expense of our people. We see it here in Jamaica. And, it's important that we ask ourselves, where does this LGBT situation, fall within our society, and how do we begin to understand it, really? And I reiterate, it's homophobia as a form of resistance. So it's not so far from us. Here we see Nzinga, who, as the slide says, in the 1640s, she was a warrior woman of the Ndongo kingdom, and she ruled as a king rather than a queen. And she was dressed as a man, and she was surrounding herself with young men she called her wives. So we see it here. And then we see King Mwanga, known as a gay king. So it's not that far from us, and I think we owe it to ourselves. We owe it to ourselves to explore it. We need to ask ourselves these questions. What is the history of homosexuality within West Africa? How can we, as Caribbean people, battle the situation that and engage and understand the situations that LGBT people face in the Caribbean? And how do we get there? I think it's important for us to remember where we came from, and ask ourselves these questions so that we can move forward. And finally, I think that we owe it to ourselves to trace our history of sexual diversity back to Africa. And I'm pretty sure that we'll be really happy and we'll be surprised at what we might find. Thank you.